So I hope that gave you some food for thought. We're about to go to our Q&A session, so I'd like to invite our speakers to take their seats at the front. And there are a couple of ground rules for questions. First of all, we're looking for questions rather than statements or speeches. Secondly, would you mind using the mic? So we've got two runners on each side so that our online audience can listen to the question and also the answer. And our Q&A session is going to be facilitated by the newly appointed Team Leader for Climate Resilience at the Christchurch City Council, Dr. Lisa Early. Lisa has joined us from the Wellington Regional Council following roles at Dunedin City, Otago University and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So I'll hand over to you, Lisa.
And thank you to our three very interesting speakers. So what I'm going to do is start off by asking a question of my own. And while that's happening, if you have a question yourselves, can you just pop your hand up, and we have runners on either side with microphones who can hand them to you, and we'll proceed from there. So my question, I was interested to hear that you had some tantalising mentions of things that were happening in Germany and the US. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about what countries, cities or companies do you think have taken up hydrogen opportunities most effectively, and in what ways? Do you want to start?
Do you want to start?
I don't think I do. I feel like I'd like to phone a friend. There's one up there. Look, I feel like Germany's been really world-leading in this. They reached out to establish the connection with the universities here and to do research on it. Hamburg Airport are our MOU partners in terms of progressing our understanding. They already have hydrogen being generated on site at their airport. So, yeah, that certainly classifies as world-leading. There's a couple of others. Birmingham Airport really want to show leadership in this space. As Hugh mentioned, actually, Chris. Sorry, Chris. Mentioned. No, you don't. You really don't. In the Cotswolds, the Zero Avia team are making enormous progress with launching aircraft and proving the technology. And I think a lot of that is to do with the subsidies from the governments in those spaces. So the Zero Avia team are an American company that have chosen to be based in the Cotswolds because the UK government have given them millions in subsidies in order to be there. So that's a difficult place for New Zealand to compete with because we don't have those same apparently available budgets. But what we do have is unencumbered airspace. We have really open and accessible regulatory environment. So we have other things going for us that make us a really great test bed, and I think it shouldn't hold us back.
Well, I was going to say Germany as well, because not only because of Hamburg Airport, but the connection with the university, the institute next door. And I think that the German government has been really proactive in choosing the Asia-Pacific region as a partner, and we in this region were able to jump on that. But you know, one of the reasons for Hamburg Airport's success is the research institute that's right next door. And so the idea is that, you know, through Sally and others here at Canterbury, that we will have something of similar standing, inspired by what's being done in a research field abroad.
Thanks.
Okay. Germany, absolutely. They're doing some great work. Last week up in the US, so Plug Power is probably one of the key leaders in provision of liquid hydrogen on site. They also do fuel cells, so they're converting warehouses full of forklifts to hydrogen. So they love it, they can replace it quickly, it's faster than charge up times and batteries, etc. I think they've already got 250 sites in the US with liquid where they're running up to 400 forklifts per site on hydrogen, so it's a very commercial position already. They've got groups up in Washington State, down in New Mexico that are doing a lot of work in truck stops, fueling, as well as drones. And then of course you've got Universal Hydrogen pursuing hydrogen flight there. We work with 3 companies up in the US on providing hydrogen solutions. We're doing probably 4 projects in the UK, 3 around flight, 1 around vehicles. Europe is, they've moved on, so the likes of Daimler and that are doing liquid hydrogen solutions already on trucks, which should be presented for commercial supply by 2025. So it's not a novel thing offshore, it's just what they're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm tempted to ask more questions, but I saw a lot of hands up.
You didn't want comments, but can I, as the German-New Zealand thing, just make a couple of comments? One would be that currently hydrogen is made, like 97% of it is made from fossil fuels with carbon emissions. That's why making nitrogen fertiliser, for example, is an emissive carbon emissions process currently. So most hydrogen is used for production of chemicals, actually. So what we've heard today is mostly around transport, and that's certainly a massive opportunity, but there are also massive opportunities in chemical production, and that includes ammonia, includes methanol, it includes making green steel going forward. So Chris Bumby at Vic has shown that our iron sands are suitable to use hydrogen in place of a lot of the coal, and this is already happening in the world. People are already using hydrogen in place of a lot of coal, so they're reducing the emissions associated with steel, which again is percentages of our emissions worldwide. So it's important also as a chemical. And finally, a comment on Germany in general. One of the other things that the German government has done is put nearly €1 billion into a fund called H2 Global, which is enabling 10-year contracts for the production of green hydrogen, so green hydrogen coming from water by electrolysis, as opposed to this nasty brown stuff, which actually is a colourless gas, but brown or grey, which is fossil fuels based, so there's emissions associated with its production. They've put all this money on the table to make these 10-year contracts to help the chicken and egg problem. That it's expensive to set these electrolysers up, and until somebody's going to use that green hydrogen, you don't have the demand. So they're trying to solve this demand cycle through investing this money, which they're prepared to lose. So they give certainty for 10 years, and they're only buying from countries outside the EU, and then they on-sell within the EU. And of course, Germany's economy is based on a chemical industry, so they care. They're going to be energy importers. They really need to have this. So great talks from everyone today, but just big point, it's also an important chemical commodity that enables things like, as Claire said, sustainable aviation fuel, which is also a key part of our future.
Thank you. Was there a question over this side?
Oh, hi. Thank you for this. It's fascinating. Hydrogen. Peter Scott's my name. I'm the chair of Environment Canada. We've got a few buses rattling around Christchurch that hydrogen may help, actually. But one of the early comments that was made, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when we started looking at hydrogen as a possibility, was the destructive nature of hydrogen towards engines. Have you got a comment on that?
It's not. It's a misinformation. So Cummins have already released a hydrogen direct burn only motor. They're not expecting any greater service intervals in current diesels, etc. The dual fuel hydrogen into existing diesel blended, no expectations of any difference. In fact, the likes of MAN and Volvo have authorised it now as a warranty continuous solution, so it doesn't void warranties, which is an interesting outcome. The hydrogen burns hotter, so it's just about controlling pressures and detonation. So you can't do it with compression, you've got to do it with ignition. Yeah. But great option for buses. Happy to help.
Thank you. Dan Gordon, Mayor of Waimakariri. Can I firstly acknowledge Mayor Phil for his passion and enthusiasm in this space, because all of us, haven't we, Peter, have had Phil's passion, or shall we call him Hindi. But it's been really, and look, this afternoon I've found really inspiring hearing where you're coming from. It's actually a follow-on question from what Peter was asking. I noticed up there was a, obviously you mentioned, is it H.W. Richardson are looking at their fleet, and I did see an Auckland Transport logo up there with their buses. So I'm just wondering, in terms of bus conversions or working internationally with other bus companies, whether that's been considered now, because obviously for our current fleet here, which Peter and the team look after, that's of great interest to us in terms of the passenger transport space and its potential. So we're quite keen to hear your answers to that, or any answers that may be offered, and sort of a time frame that that could be considered by.
Is that me? Okay. Can probably have 10 ready for you by next week.
Excellent.
Yeah. So here's one of the challenges, if I'm allowed to talk to this. This concept of expecting better or different for less, we're fooling ourselves. There's an economic hurdle we've got to come over. So hydrogen buses currently will cost you more than a diesel, and they will cost you more than an EV. They will be better for our planet, and they can be made locally. So the full technology of the hydrogen cycle can all be made in Canterbury. We've got Global Bus Ventures here doing the buses, etc. The Auckland bus was built by them, but unfortunately the infrastructure supplied wasn't good enough. So waiting 12 hours to fill a bus up just doesn't work. It's almost as bad as having an electric one trying to charge it. So the trucks, the buses, etc. are available now, but it does take a commitment. And one of the challenges we have in this hydrogen space is people look at hydrogen, the cost of it, compared to diesel. When you do hydrogen production, you get oxygen, process heat, and hydrogen. You've got this ability to use all three streams of energy, gases, etc., for revenue. So done correctly, when you offset the process heat as a sale, the oxygen as a sale, your hydrogen becomes very, very, very cheap, to the point where it's cost comparable, if not cheaper, than diesel currently.
So is anyone else converted internationally, do you know, at this point?
Hydrogen buses? Yeah, absolutely. So it's significant business up in China. They're doing hydrogen buses. Through Europe, they do hydrogen buses. Yeah, it's not too far on from where we were with CNG years ago. Yeah.
Go for it.
Tim Jackson from Commercial and Governance. Thank you very much for this. It's really important work you guys are doing. My question is actually for Claire. In regards to Ko-Fi Park, which has got 150 megawatts of potential solar coming through, and it's as the red to green approach for it that Malcolm put in, looking from a council point of view, how can we, it is something we've got to look at it for transport, how can we actually optimise solar on a commercial basis for ourselves to actually help facilitate, to then look at our fleet and as a transition movement? How can we get behind it? How can you sell that solar to us, or how can we partner to actually get ourselves in a strategic position?
I think at the start of this, Lynn mentioned the council's goals around emissions reduction, and that I think is it net zero by 2045? It's faster than the rest of the country, so go Canterbury. I think there's a real potential from Ko-Fi Park for that to be accessible to the rest of the city. We do need a lot of it for hydrogen generation on site, but there's certainly potential in the next 10 years to have offtake agreements with the joint venture partners. It'll be through Contact Energy, where you could get locally generated renewable energy, so zero emission electricity, and have the benefit of the electricity supply as well as knowing that that's clean energy, so zero emissions. So if you're wondering what to do with your Scope 2 emissions, those kind of arrangements are really helpful. In terms of using their electricity, was your follow-up question about the land transport?
Yeah, it was effectively, so you've got several councils here.
Yep.
Sorry, you've got several councils here. We're all looking at decarbonisation of our transport fleets, but also at the moment with solar, it is actually cheaper than getting through a REC energy through like Meridian or for Scope 2 or anyone else, or even Genesis, where at the moment it's worthwhile us doing solar. If Ko-Fi's going to go ahead, how do we get as part of that? Because you're going to have the hydrogen infrastructure in place, it makes more sense for us to partner with you than actually do our individual piece, because unfortunately when you decentralise it, it gets to a point where you actually can't centralise it. So it makes sense for us to actually, if we're going to encourage it for Canterbury, to actually go with a centralised plan like Ko-Fi Park.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's potential to decentralise it and have a few locations around Canterbury. You might want to put it by the port because there is real potential for maritime solutions in this space, and certainly it's very clearly obvious that we will need it at the airport. In the next couple of years, we'll be having landside accessible hydrogen refuelling stations on site. So we've got quite a few partners that are interested in setting up refuelling stations which would be accessible to any member of the public to come and refuel. That'll be good news for you. Vehicles at, and then, yeah, they're totally handy. And then the large-scale hydrogen refuelling that we would be preparing for aviation would come a little bit after that, but there would be a growing scale of what's available, of which it won't be too long before there would be a refuelling station out there. We've actually got 3 parties that are interested that are working with our property team at the moment. In terms of decarbonising the rest of your picture, one of the things we found most challenging about what's left for us is we've got a few items. I said we were 94% reduced. We've got 6% left. Part of that is a technology challenge where the available technology doesn't exist yet, and I'm thinking of refrigerants or electric fire trucks, other specific use cases. But another big challenge thinking about the airport campus, which in effect is like a mini city, so it's not dissimilar to trying to solve a council sort of catchment area, just on a smaller scale, is the limitations of the grid at present. So it's actually trying to get the electricity to the end use. So for example, through COVID, a lot of rental car facilities sold off a lot of their fleet. When they then started buying back fleet, they all wanted electric vehicles and they all wanted rapid chargers. And suddenly putting that amount of rapid chargers onto our system meant that our infrastructure was really unable to support that transition. So it became a real problem. So another benefit of the Ko-Fi Park solar piece is that it allows us to build a new loop ring main around our campus so we can bypass the distribution network that isn't fit for purpose and get direct electricity from the solar panels to the high end users that need it. And so that's another one of the, I guess, difficult challenges that you have if you don't have it decentralised next to your use case. So if it's a high use case that you've got, then I would just say get one of Chris's modular containers. They come in a variety of sizes, and try and put those next to it. But otherwise, grid capacity, I think, is going to be the biggest issue.
Thank you. We have a question up the back.
Cool. John Sunkel, the Ken Councillor. But if I put my primary industry agricultural hat on, absolutely understand transport, aviation, mining. What thoughts are any for agriculture itself? We have the challenge of our biogenic gases, but the other part of our equation is the fossil fuel. So any thoughts around agriculture of production, transport, utilisation for tractors and what we do on the land?
Already doing tractors, so you can do a conversion, exactly the same conversion where you can displace up to 60% of the diesel use by gas injection. The challenge with fuel cells, they don't like vibrations and dust yet, so a direct application into off-road is a current challenge, but 24 months it'll be sorted. The key thing is, if you take one of our freight trucks off the road, and for 1 year that is off the road, it's equivalent to a dairy farm of 450 cows. So there's a lot to be said. Well, again, and I'm definitely not paid by them, but you know, H.W. Richardson's are setting up a CO2 fund where you get your cows picked up by one of their trucks, and you can take the abatement certificate for the CO2 not emitted in doing that. So it's that sort of clever thinking which I think is needed in agriculture to help our farmers combat some of the challenges being faced by them. But there's solutions for machinery, absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Hi. Chris, I know you talked to me about it, but the others haven't heard it, as far as using your electrolyzers, energisers again with wastewater treatment plants for making oxygen, because they love oxygen out there.
So one of the primary uses of the CPH2 electrolysers is actually into Northern Ireland for offsetting investment in wastewater management. So rather than using more land, etc., for processing human waste, they are using the oxygen from the electrolysers. Remember, you take a tonne of water, actually let me do 4 tonne of water, or 4,000 litres, you get half a tonne of hydrogen and 3.5 tonne of oxygen. So most of our industrial processes don't use oxygen because it's too expensive. The shift to a hydrogen economy provides a lot of oxygen, which enables us to start changing the way we use oxygen in industry. Wastewater is an absolute winner of that one, because obviously the more oxygen you can put through the process, the greater the breakdown, less space required.
You mentioned earlier around, if I can correct, around vehicle conversions, and you're working with Richardson's. So how easy is it to convert an existing motor to hydrogen? You were talking about Cummins, MAN, Volvo, for example, and for instance, existing bus fleet, for example, how easy would that be to convert? Is there a certain standard? A motor's got to be a certain age for it to be able to cope with that level of conversion. Just interested in your comments in that space.
Funny enough, the older the motor, the better. Hydrogen and combustion doesn't like high compression. Euro 6 has gone higher compression, Euro 5's less. You can convert old buses, etc., but again, there's a conversion cost, and you've got to look at what's the life of my fleet. We see the work that H.W. Richardson's doing, it's enabling demand now for use of hydrogen, and it's providing a passage for people to take existing fleet and start reducing their emissions. So it's a short term. It's only 20 to 30 years. Whereas, ultimately within 20 to 30 years, you'll have motors, Cummins, etc., that are run-of-the-mill. So Toyota's already doing it with cars. I've got a Corolla that's running on hydrogen through an existing internal combustion engine. So it is the future of where it's going. Existing buses, existing trucks, absolutely. The question with buses that I would say is the ability to make hydrogen fuel cell buses here in Canterbury would make more sense as you start swapping out fleets.
And we have time for one more question. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Chris, the economics of it, I mean, sustainable change has got to be environmentally sustainable as well, because we can only spend so much money on saving the world. So what are the economics of hydrogen if New Zealand switched to hydrogen? Say in 10 years' time we're 95% hydrogen. What does that look like economically? And also, do we have enough power to do that as green hydrogen? Go.
Can I just, I'm going to give it to you because you are definitely, yeah, I'm just going to say up front, I'm an energy and electricity engineer. There's no limitation to the provision of electricity. Okay, but one of the greatest things we've got to overcome is human behaviour. That's one of our tripping points. And I don't think at any stage we can argue about, is this decarbonisation something we should or shouldn't do? We definitely have to do it. I'll leave. Have I set it up for you now?
Yeah, that's perfect. So one of the things I mentioned was the work that's being done at Canterbury on modelling, particularly by Rebecca Peer and Yannick Haas, about a more integrated energy system that includes transport but also heating and other considerations. And to the point about behaviour change, it's finished now, but we had a really big project at University of Canterbury called Green Grid, which ran for about 5 years, which was modelling, again, back to this whole energy, but that was an electricity modelling for the whole of New Zealand project. And they had sociologists in that project because of the issue of behaviour change, really thinking about how people would take the ideas on board as well. Behaviour change is a whole topic on its own. I'm currently thinking about behaviour change to do with air travel, and it's incredibly complex. I've delved into the literature. It's not trivial, and it often doesn't affect change on its own. You have to have some level of implementation as well, sadly, but it seems to be human nature.
wise note, we've got another
Can I add just
response? Cool.
I think with hydrogen, it's really got to be a best use case scenario. So it's not the solution for everything. So I really don't think we want a situation where New Zealand is looking at 90% hydrogen use. We just want to use it in the situations where it makes the most sense, because we need to be energy efficient. So in some cases, it's going to be electricity is more energy efficient and a better solution than hydrogen will be. I think this whole transition is going to require all the tools that we have available to us. So sometimes electricity, sometimes green hydrogen only. There's no excuse for us to do any other form of hydrogen in New Zealand. Sometimes rapid, sometimes active transport solutions, sometimes behavioural, but certainly not always hydrogen. That's a poor way to end a hydrogen summit, sorry.
So we've just got to 4:30, so we're going to have to wrap. I'd like to invite you to join with me in thanking our speakers and facilitator. I think they've done a great job this afternoon. So hopefully we've also demystified a little of the hydrogen equation, but also stimulated some further questions which you will want to explore. But thank you all for attending this afternoon, both in person and online. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa, ka mutu te hui, kia haumaru o koutou hairanga ki au koutou kāinga. Mā te wā.